Welcome to Table for 92, element number 82, lead. It's number 82 because it has exactly 82 protons within its nucleus. So yeah, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Quite often, actually, when you're thinking about lead. So yeah, for lead, I'm cooking up some sapa. It's the sweet condiment that may have just brought the Empire of Rome to the point of destruction. Our search for like sweet, sugary foods has dominated whole human society for the last 13,000 years. Ever since the first farmers in the Fertile Crescent settled down and started growing high in sugar grains full time. That's why they started growing things like barley and wheat and eventually rice. It's all really high in sugar and you can make cool sugary stuff with it. It's no coincidence the first farmers grew exclusively foods high in sugar. Wheat, barley, rice, wine grapes, right? Rome, though, like thousands of years after the first hunter-gatherers settled down, they took this to a whole new level. The sweet condiment that took down the Roman elite, it's super easy to make. It's literally just like grape juice. You squeeze fresh grapes into juice and you boil that down to a third of it in a lead-based pot, right? That's what the Romans did. I'm not doing that because, you know, I like my brain to function normally. Maybe I'll have kids one day, I don't know. But yeah, it really messed up the Romans. But the thing is, you know, lead tastes sweet. That's why they use the lead-based pots. Like, it's one of the few metals that do taste sweet. Beryllium actually also does, but most metals have a metallic taste, not lead. So this sapa will go on a roasted chicken, sour, and it's not like a real recipe book, but it's called the Apicius de Re Coquinaria, and it's the oldest known cookbook in existence. Who wrote down this collection of Roman recipes? It's usually attributed to this like super foodie in ancient Rome whose name was Marcus Gavius Apicius. He lived in the 1st century, but there's some controversy about like who actually wrote it. But you know, that's ancient history for you, you know. There's a ton of weird recipes in there. Like there's recipes for roasted flamingo, a sow's womb, ostrich, parrot, you know. Yeah, the Romans ate some weird stuff, at least by, you know, modern standards.
Chaffinch brains, jaguar's earlobe, wolf nipple chips. Get them while they're off, they're lovely.
Wolf nipples, yes. Apicius, yeah, he himself once wrote down that flamingo tongue has an especially fine flavor, so maybe try that one day. Unfortunately, Apicius doesn't really give us exact recipes. It's more like, you know, a collection of foods, and he has no exact amounts of ingredients, so you have to interpret the recipe yourself. The chicken sour recipe goes as such, right? A good-sized glass of oil, a smaller glass of broth, and the smallest measure of vinegar. So that's what I got to go on. So I'm gonna braise the chicken in oil and broth and the smallest measure of vinegar. Finish it off on the asado, top with the sapa. So, you know, that's my interpretation of it. As Apicius states, this chicken sour is called pullum azizomum in Latin. But of course we don't actually know how Latin was pronounced, so. The most common mineral ore is galena. It's a very beautiful mineral. It grows in cubes, actually. It's very dense, it's very heavy. It's actually a lead sulfide. Archaeologically speaking though, we first started extracting lead from its ores around 6,000 years ago. The earliest lead artifacts comes from the Negev desert in modern day Israel. It's a kind of weird bead that was attached to a stick. It was found deep in a cave. But the analysis of the lead shows it was actually mined in modern day Turkey. So I mean, that means not only that like people were using lead much earlier than 6,000 years ago, but they already had long distance trade routes already established before the wheel, before the domestication of the horse. People seem to really like lead. One of the many ways ancient peoples used lead was in cosmetics, actually. The ancient Egyptians were crazy about the stuff. They even seemed to invent new kinds of lead salts that were crushed and used in eyeliner. You know, all those like really famous images of ancient Egyptians. They had that black eyeliner. It looks really good. I mean, they're pretty attractive paintings, I gotta say. But it was actually believed too that the eyeliner would prevent eye diseases, and some modern research backs that up, weirdly enough. I mean, yeah, it's the Egyptians, like they built the pyramids, so like, yeah, they figured out some stuff. Oh yeah, lead is one of the few chemical elements that were known by ancient peoples, right? There's only a handful. You got gold, silver, lead, copper, mercury, antimony, iron, tin, sulfur, and carbon to like a lesser extent. But yeah, that's it. Of the 92 naturally occurring elements, there were only that handful known in the ancient world. So these elements, especially the metal ones, were extremely important, not just as tools and decoration, but also like religiously. There was a belief around much of the ancient world, especially the ancient Mediterranean world, that the metals, these like metals were, you know, not only associated with gods, but with other planets. It's like the celestial bodies, right? But yeah, think about that for a second. Like you've got these 7 metals that seem to be gifts from the gods. You've got 7 celestial bodies up in space. Yeah, I mean, it's an association that's not, you know, unreasonable, I guess I would say, especially if these are ancient peoples, you know? So yeah, gold is associated with the sun, makes sense. Same with silver and the moon. Iron being used as a weapon of war was associated with Mars, both the planet and the god of war in ancient Rome. And we know the planet glows red because of iron in its atmosphere nowadays. Quicksilver or Mercury, that, you know, is associated with that planet. Tin is Jupiter, copper's Venus, and finally, lead is with Saturn associated, right? These were the 7 celestial bodies. And yeah, I guess too, like it was probably in the minds of people thousands of years ago, it was still kind of like in their head that stone tools like had been around up until not that long ago. So yeah, it's like we thank the gods for this lead and these other metals. It's great. But lead's association with Saturn is like right on the money. Like lead is extremely dense, very heavy and slow. So of course it's paired with big dumb slow Saturn up in the sky. Ancient observers of the sky noticed Saturn had the slowest orbit of the celestial bodies and appropriately assigned lead to it. But yeah, not a coincidence, you know, being dense is an adjective for like, you know, being a fool, at least in like more like British English. Like we don't really use that much here in like the US.
I'm your density.
So lead production really started to take off during the time of the Roman Republic and later Empire. And of course, lead was, you know, discovered independently in other areas of the world, you know, including Africa, Asia, and the Americas. But what happened between lead and the Romans, like really could have changed the course of world history more than anything else in the past couple thousand years. So the Romans, like 2,000 years ago, they're spreading like wildfire across the Mediterranean. The ancient Roman writer Tacitus, he said, the Romans create a desert and call it peace. You know, like they burn everything down, enslave everyone, and be like,
everybody chill! It's cool now.
like some of the conquests the Romans did around the Mediterranean and up into England and Germany and all that, it really had to do just with extracting minerals. Within 6 years of entering England, the Romans had huge lead mines. Same thing happened in Spain. You know, this supplied most of the lead for the empire. They did that for the tin in England too, so they could create bronze. You know, lead was used in coins and ammunition for slingshot shooters in the Roman army. But most importantly, lead was used in lead pipes to pipe spring water, and they used lead-lined goblets to drink their wine, and wine vats were made with lead. I mean, it was terrible. Like modern day archaeologists have analyzed lead pipes used by the Romans, and there's like 100 times the amount of lead that was safe present in their water. You know, like deemed safe for what we could be drinking today. And so yeah, the fall of the Roman Empire has a lot of reasons. I mean, people obsess over this, right? You know, barbarian invasions from the north, military defeats in the east, political instability, collapsing currency, the fact that the wealthy bought up all the land and kicked off small farmers and decided to run a slave plantation agricultural system, and the lead in the drinking water and their wine. Like, you gotta talk about that. But yeah, this wasn't across all of society though, which is really interesting. It mostly affected the wealthy classes of Rome, the people that could actually afford to drink wine all day and have water piped into their homes. This was the managerial class of Rome, the future emperors, the landowners, the oligarchs. I mean, lead poisoning, I mean, it messes your whole body up, and it has terrible psychiatric effects and birth defects and lower overall birth rates. I mean, it's just terrible. So just a few generations of lead poisoning among these oligarchs opened up the path for weak leadership, political instability, military defeats, low birth rates, and an overall bad time. Of course, they didn't know like the lead in their everything was doing what it was doing, but they should have. We have writings from 2,000 years before the Roman Empire was around describing how bad lead was, but lead tastes really sweet. It was ignored for the longest time because of that. Aside from the pipes in the wine in Rome, there was the sweetener sapa that was hugely popular among the rich. These lead goblets used in cooking produced lead acetate, also known as sugar of lead. And again, this was, you know, eaten almost exclusively by the rich. Like, it really is fascinating how much like this affected life in the Roman Empire. Since we now know how bad lead is to humans, there have been studies of, you know, what happened in Rome 2,000 years ago. Skeletal remains show people having like 400 times higher lead concentration in their bodies than that of Iron Age people that lived right before them. So even even atmospheric levels of lead went up like 10 times. Like, they were poisoning the air with how much lead smelting was going on. However, the lead the Romans left behind has been incredibly important for physicists today. Yeah, weirdly enough, these lead ingots that were made by the Romans and lost in shipwrecks like 2,000 years ago have become a strange flashpoint between physicists and archaeologists. When you cast lead, even today, it retains a lot of natural radioactivity. But when cast lead has been exposed to the elements, especially in like seawater for 2,000 years, all that radioactivity has gone away. This is only something time can do. So, lead ingots that have been discovered throughout the Mediterranean are like a blessing to physicists, and they've been doing this for years. Physicists have often taken the lead from old churches and other buildings to experiment with, but in the last 15 years in physics, it's been really an amazing time. A lot has been, discovered. For instance, like for a long time, it was thought neutrinos had no mass. This has been disproven now, partially by experiments that have been done with the ancient Roman lead. The physicists would have basically, they have to basically destroy the artifacts when they're doing these experiments. So, naturally, archaeologists are kind of pissed that their magnificent finds are getting destroyed, but agreements have been made between the archaeologists and the physicists. So, the maker's marks on ingots have been removed and preserved in museums, and the rest is handed over to the physicists so they can, figure out the mysteries of the universe. So, cool collaboration going on. Neutrinos are extremely small particles. Tens of trillions pass through the human body every second of the day. Very, very small indeed. And they have no mass. So neutrinos are, quote, hundreds of times lighter than the next lightest particle, which is the electron. Lead probably led to some of the issues of the Roman Republic, but gave us incredible insight into the universe through their lost lead ingots. So, trade-off, I guess. But, the same things the Romans were doing, we did to ourselves in recent history. All over the United States, all over the world. Lead, it's cheap, it doesn't corrode easily, it's easy to manufacture, it's just so versatile. And so, yeah, we used it in our everything over the past couple centuries, from paints to gasoline. And again, we should have known better. They were writing about this thousands of years ago. Benjamin Franklin wrote about this 300 years ago, right? He was working in a London print shop that used leaded ink, and a bunch of his coworkers had lost the use of their hands, and he endured terrible joint pain that led to him to swear off leaded paint. He actually has a great quote about how people are just so unwilling to accept the dangers of versatile lead being used in so many fields. You will observe with concern how long and useful a truth may be known and exist before it's generally received and practiced on. That's not at all relevant to today's problems. So yeah, the whole lead in paint thing though in modern times is really funny anecdote for me. When I was growing up, Tommy Boy was my favorite movie. R.I.P. Chris Farley. But yeah, it's a hilarious me, but as a 9-year-old, I didn't understand 90% of the jokes that were going on. But there's this one recurring joke in the movie that I didn't understand at all, but as I rewatched as an adult and knew about lead paint, it started to make sense. So Tommy Boy, in the movie, he says something dumb, par for the course, and someone says back to him, "Did you eat a lot of paint chips when you were a kid?" And I thought the joke was, oh, he's so dumb, he eats paint chips. But I grew up in the 90s and 2000s. The US government banned lead in paints in 1978. So for the generation or two before me, I guess that might have been a common insult or something. Because remember, lead tastes sweet and kids will basically taste anything. So it was a problem back in the 50s, 60s, 70s where kids were eating dried paint chips and because, it's sweet and they're getting all those negative effects because of the lead in it, But yeah, it totally went over my head.
Did you eat a lot of paint chips when you were a kid? Why?
But yeah, in fact, since banning lead in paints, food containers, and gasoline, lead levels on average for Americans have gone way down. I mean, way down. But that lead though, when it gets in your system, people of a certain age today are still carrying around tons of lead that younger people don't at all. The difference between the US though and the Roman Empire is very interesting in this case. So lead exposure went straight through all socioeconomic classes in the US all over the world too. The poor and the rich were getting equal amounts of childhood exposure to lead. So that's neat. It's how democratized our use of lead in poisoning children was. Wonderful, isn't it? Yeah, so much better than the Romans. So yeah, here's a little snippet from an academic article about lead exposure in children before the Clean Air Act happened. This is so funny. So in a sample of over 1.5 million people, we found that US and European residents who grew up with higher levels of atmospheric lead had less adaptive personality profiles in adulthood. So lower conscientiousness, lower agreeableness, and higher neuroticism. Yeah, ouch, man. So explains a lot of those like awkward Thanksgivings with your drunk uncle. Blame lead for that. So yeah, lead in gasoline though is a funny story too. Well, I mean, it's terrible, it killed a bunch of people, but this one guy, he was like objectively evil. So when the internal combustion engine was invented, one of the big problems was called engine knock, where the burning gasoline would literally like cause the engine to bounce around. Someone figured out if you add a little lead to the gas, it won't bounce around as much. So for decades, we burned insane amounts of lead without a care in the world. So the guy really responsible for this, Thomas Midgley Jr., never heard of him? He was the poster child for leaded gasoline when automobiles were getting huge in like the 1920s. One of my favorite books of all time, A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson, talks a lot about Midgley and has one of the most like intellectually sickest burns of all time about Midgley. So yeah, Midgley possessed an instinct for the regrettable that was almost uncanny. Yeah. Burn. So this dude Midgley, he was responsible for leaded gasoline. Oh, and also chlorofluorocarbons, you know, that stuff that destroys the atmosphere. Midgley himself, though, even though he knew lead was poisoned, he, you know, still pushed it on people. But he once held this press conference where he inhaled leaded additives and washed his hands with it in front of cameras to, like, you know, as propaganda, to be like, hey, lead, it's totally fine. Look, I can drink it, I can breathe it, you know. Then he opened a plant here in New Jersey, like 20 miles that way, that exposed workers to these leaded additives, and it killed 5 people in 2 months and poisoned a ton more, with a lot having psychiatric episodes. So we think during the heyday of lead being used and all that stuff, about 5,000 people a year were dying from it in the US. That's directly from what Midgley was talking about and was pushing on us. But yeah, that went on up until the 1970s. But you know, I don't know, maybe karma does exist, because Midgley developed polio in his 40s and he was paralyzed, and while he was bedridden, he created this system of pulleys that helped to move around. And yeah, he got caught up in his ropes of the system, and he strangled himself to death. So I guess there's a good ending to the lead story. I mean, I don't know. Obviously lead is, you know, used today for certain things. It's an ammunition. That's controversial though, because when lead hits meat, it, you know, and it's a very soft metal, it splinters into like a million pieces, and some are so small you can ingest it without knowing about it. So, you know, it's something I keep in mind as a hunter, but I mostly bow hunt though, so it's not like a huge deal for me. It was very good. It's probably not as sweet without the lead inside, so maybe I just take a little of this Galena and crush it up and sprinkle. No, don't do that. Lead bad, don't lead. Lead bad. And that guy Midgley kind of deserved what he got. Well, thanks, and see you next time.